Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC 290, Dricus Du Plessis defeated Robert Whittaker via second round TKO in one of the craziest and most impressive performances of the year. And immediately afterwards, the UFC takes a great moment of Dricus Du Plessis finishing Robert Whittaker. What a crazy moment to earn himself the #1 contender spot. And we ruin it by bringing in middleweight champion Israel Adesanya for a stare down and for an opportunity for the UFC to get some promotional material for a future fight between the two. We're going to discuss this entire situation, how I feel about it. We're going to discuss the future fight and an early prediction. And we're going to discuss the whole backstory of who's more African, King of Africa, which I never really wanted to talk about, and the racial undertones of the build-up to an Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis fight. So first off, Du Plessis, against all odds, nobody really believed him, or the majority of the MMA community did not believe in him, goes out there and starches Robert Whittaker, melts Robert Whittaker, puts on a performance of a lifetime to earn a middleweight title shot. And Israel Adesanya said, I want this fight. I didn't even want them to book Du Plessis versus Whittaker. I want this fight before that. Forget about that fight. I don't want Whittaker to kill him off. And Du Plessis gets the fight with Whittaker. Adesanya comes out and says, yeah, I'm really hoping that Du Plessis wins because I want to fight him. And they already have this fight in Australia at UFC 293 in September. And we're going to discuss something that's really unfair to Du Plessis that I feel like is getting lost in all the chaos later in the video as well. But Du Plessis goes out there and gets the win. He's getting a title shot against Israel Adesanya later this year. And so the UFC's like, let's bring in Israel Adesanya for a stare down. And before we even get into the specifics of what happened during the stare down, I hate these moments. I absolutely hate these moments. I think they're corny. I think they're cringy no matter what, no matter who's involved. You go back to the Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley stare down back at UFC 288. I hated it then. And these types of situations give me PTSD to back when Daniel Cormier knocked out Stipe Miocic for the UFC heavyweight belt, and the UFC trotted in Brock Lesnar for some pushing and shoving and some screaming at each other, all to promote an inevitable fight that never happened. And that's essentially what they're doing here. Obviously, the fight is going to happen, but I'm just saying these WWE antics are completely unnecessary. We do not need these moments at all. And there is a portion of the MMA media and there's a portion of the MMA fan base that wants to turn MMA and the UFC into WWE, and I'm so tired of it. There is some legitimate backstories. There is some great, ways to promote certain fights without having to get into these weird antics where they put them in the cage and they have them stare off and they start shouting at each other on the microphone in front of a live crowd. And how many pay-per-view buys do you guys really think this adds to it? I really don't think it's adding that much. Like, do you think Adesanya versus Du Plessis went up by 200,000 pay-per-view buys because they pushed and no, they didn't even push and shove. They just yelled at each other in the cage. Really, only Adesanya was even the one yelling. Is there somebody who's really watching this in cage, interaction and saying, yeah, I'm definitely going to buy this pay-per-view now? Or, you know what? I wish there was some pushing and shoving between these grown men. Then I'd order the pay-per-view twice because it would get me so excited for it. I really don't believe those people exist. I don't, maybe there's definitely people that love the WWE type stuff, but I think they're going to buy the pay-per-view anyway, especially a fight between Adesanya and Du Plessis, especially with Du Plessis coming off a massive win over Robert Whittaker, proving himself in the middleweight division, which some people already believed he did, but he went out there and melted Robert Whittaker, a guy who Adesanya fought in 2022 to a decision. So I think the fight already sells itself, and people just want these WWE antics for whatever reason. And a lot of the MMA media just push it and like it as well. You have Ariel Helwani, who's always loving the WWE antics. I'm so tired of it, and it's unfair to Dricus. And this is what I was talking about earlier. We're going to get something else that's unfair for him. But it's just unfair. He just got the biggest win of his career, and now you're just trotting somebody in to kind of shit on it. I'm not a fan of that at all. Let him have his moment. Let him enjoy his win. You're basically just bringing work back up. He just finished his training camp and he got in there with Robert Whittaker and got the win. He's relieved the weight off his shoulder. And now you're just kind of bringing it up again, throwing it right in his face, ruining a moment, stealing his shine in a way. I hate that. And then you get down to what actually happened in the interaction, where it was basically Israel Adesanya yelling my N-word and my African brother. And you had Du Plessis say, oh, you may be African, but you're no brother of mine. And then you had Adesanya saying, well, you need to take an ancestry test and you'll see where you're from. I'll take an ancestry test and I'll see where I'm from. And it just brings up this whole entire who breathes African air every day, just situation, who's the real African champion, and Du Plessis is going to be the real African champion, or Adesanya is the real African champion. And I absolutely hate this entire storyline, and I hate this entire build up. And I was actually rooting against Du Plessis because I didn't want to hear this storyline. And it's not even really Du Plessis' fault. And the background of this entire situation has been vastly misrepresented by both sides in an attempt to kind of steer the narrative in a certain way. And what happened was, a few months back, Du Plessis, was asked about the other African champions, whether it be Adesanya, Ngannou, or Usman. And Du Plessis kind of said, well, do those belts ever really go to Africa? Adesanya lives in New Zealand, blah, blah, blah. And, basically saying, look, I'm going to be the first real African champion. And I know people have misrepresented that. He did not outright say that I will be the first real African champion. Du Plessis did not say that. And a lot of people were regurgitating those exact lines. And I don't think that's necessarily right. But at the end of the day, Du Plessis was implying that. That's what he was implying. But the way I feel about that entire thing, even if he came out and said it, if Du Plessis came out and said it and said, look, those guys never even lived in Africa when they won their belts. So I'm the real African champion. I'll be the real first African champion. Do I love it? No. It doesn't really make any sense because at the end of the day, there's all this different talk about nationalism and where you're from and race and different ethnicities. At the end of the day, I don't care who wants to claim what. If Adesanya wants to say he's an African champion, sure. If he wants to say he's the first Kiwi champion, sure. I don't even know if that's accurate, but you get my point. If Adesanya wants to say he's a Chinese champion, sure. I don't care. If Du Plessis wants to say I'm the first real African champion because I live and train in South Africa, that's fine. I don't care. Again, I don't love it because it's stupid, because I feel like, oh, well, Du Plessis is born and raised in Africa and still lives in Africa. Of course he's an African champion. Adesanya was born in Africa. He doesn't necessarily live in Africa still, but he's still an African champion. The same thing with Ngannou and Usman. And Usman came out afterwards and said some really dumb stuff about how, oh, well, Du Plessis thinks he can move to Africa and still be champion. He was born there. Just dumb. I mean, just so dumb by all sides. And Du Plessis hasn't really stoked it. After that, he has not really stoked it. He's kind of sat back and said, look, all I was saying is I was going to be the first African champion to live in Africa. And fair enough to him. I don't love all that. I don't love that type of buildup. But what he's saying is accurate. But I don't care. I think this is the stupidest storyline. And the way this originated was the fact that they just wanted to build a storyline between these two guys. I think Du Plessis kind of said it to get his name in the headlines, to get some talk about him getting a title shot against Adesanya. At the time, there was not even talk of Du Plessis fighting Adesanya. And that kind of got him there. And I think Adesanya has taken it and now is twisting it into something that it's not as well, and kind of using it as motivation, but also just using it to promote the fight. I do not think that Du Plessis is racist by any means. I don't even think Adesanya is being racist. I know people say, oh, well, Adesanya called him a cracker. And I get it, technically that's a racial slur. And I know somebody's going to say, oh, how can you defend this? People calling it the C word. I mean, that's the most embarrassing. I've never met someone in my entire life offended by the C word, the C word. Nobody's offended by that. And Adesanya said it. It's stupid. I don't appreciate it. I don't like it. I don't love it. I don't even want to hear it. But nobody's offended by that. Nobody cares about that. And people compare it to the N-word. People are, oh, what if Du Plessis called him the N-word? Oh, could you imagine the outrage? That is not even remotely in the same universe whatsoever. That is not even close to the same universe. The words are not even on the same level playing field. It's just not the same. And Du Plessis would never do that anyway. Du Plessis would never do it because I think he kind of regrets this whole storyline, how it got built. But it is the dumbest storyline. Who cares who's breathing what air on what continent? It doesn't matter. The fight already sells itself. Look how good Israel Adesanya looked against Alex Pereira in his last fight, against a guy who was 3-0 against him. That was a storyline going in, and the guy who stopped him at UFC 281. Adesanya went out there with his back against the wall and brutally slept Alex Pereira, who was massive and had unbelievable power in his hands, and a lot of people thought he had his number. Then you have Du Plessis, undefeated in the UFC, and went out there and just mauled Robert Whittaker and destroyed him and finished him and melted him up against the cage. That's all I need. We don't need all this weird hyper-nationalism, you know, bringing race and ethnicity into it. It's just stupid. And I really, truly believe this is just both sides trying to promote a fight. And Du Plessis kind of already just kind of started to avoid it, saying, you know what, I'm not even saying this type of stuff. You know, I'm just saying that I'm the first guy that's going to live in Africa and be a champion. And I honestly never even want to make any videos about this. But now that the fight's actually going to happen and you had this in-cage interaction, a lot of people were asking me, make a video reaction talking about this. I just think it's unnecessary. And I think it's one of the dumbest storylines we could ever get. And it's WWE-esque. Not only is the interaction in the cage WWE-esque, this whole storyline, and the UFC is going to promote it. Daniel Cormier on the broadcast was saying, yeah, well, this is going to be for the real king of Africa, or this is going to be for Africa, or something like that. I can't remember what Daniel Cormier said, but he said something immediately afterwards, like promoting the fight, because the fight is probably going to happen at UFC 293. I think it's like September 9th. Later this year. It's like a little over 60 days away from the time that Dricus Du Plessis fought Robert Whittaker. But this entire thing was an embarrassment. I think Israel Adesanya embarrassed himself. I think he was so cringy. And I know the word cringy is overused when defining Israel Adesanya. And I know we had something to drink in the crowd, but to come out here and just start screaming about, oh, what about your ethnicity? And you need to take an ancestry test and you'll find out where you're truly from. Who cares about all that? I truly don't know who's watching this and actually caring about where Du Plessis' ancestors are from. And I think there is going to be fans on both sides, though, that are going to use this as an excuse to just bring race and ethnicity into it. There is people, the NASCAR fans on one side, on the Du Plessis side, that's going to be screaming, you know, anti-white racism, and can you believe he called him the C word, and I'm so offended by it, even though they're not really. And then you're going to have people on the Adesanya side who are maybe Adesanya fanboys who are going to say, look at Du Plessis, you know, he's a racist. Can you believe the way he said I'm going to be the real African? And it's just dumb. And it's unnecessary. We should never be bringing race into really anything. I actually hate hypernationalism in MMA in general. This has been my stance forever. It's just stupid. It's irrelevant. And I don't even think it brings that much to a pay-per-view, especially a fight like this, where Du Plessis just proved himself as a legitimate middleweight contender. So, you know, I really just hated this entire thing. It's not really Du Plessis' fault. He did start to bring it up, and I feel like people are saying, well, he didn't actually say that, but he did imply it. But it doesn't matter if he did or didn't. It does not matter. He's not racist. He's not attempting to be racist. I think Adesanya is just playing into it because at the end of the day, this is going to line both their pockets. I foresee a scenario after they fight, whether they fight once or fight twice, if Du Plessis wins, and in the future, maybe years down the line, I think Adesanya and Du Plessis will hug it out, maybe even immediately after the fight and say, oh, it's just business. To take a quote from Conor McGregor, it's just business. That's it. It's just business. They are using this to promote the fight. They're using this whole African storyline to promote the fight. And you know Dana White will do anything for a buck. He will promote this and promote it to create more pay-per-view buys. This whole entire storyline, he's going to exploit it and basically, you know, oh, it's an MMA race war now, and oh, we're going to have the black guy in Israel Adesanya versus the white South African and Du Plessis, and there's going to be a lot of the fans who are going to kind of eat that up, but the storyline is just unnecessary. It's a dumb storyline. The fight itself is already, in my opinion, amazing, and it's going to happen at UFC 293, which is a little over 60 days away, which is crazy to me. Because this is very unfair, and this is what I talked about earlier. Not only did Adesanya ruin Du Plessis' moment in the cage after a big win, I really do believe it's unfair. Like, I don't want to see this fight on 2 months' notice. 3 months, okay. 3.5 months, okay. Maybe 4 months, okay. But the fact that Du Plessis has to go right from a training camp and fighting Robert Whittaker to now turn around on 2 months' notice and fight Israel Adesanya, he essentially has to go right back into camp. That is an unfair advantage for Israel Adesanya. I do love that this isn't one of those fights where they talk about and then we got to wait 9 months or we got to wait a year. I mean, look at Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. Imagine you got excited for that. Imagine you were hyped about that in January. That fight's still not announced and we're in mid-July. So I am happy that it's very soon. It's going to happen soon. So hopefully we don't have to have this African storyline go on forever. But I think it's unfair. I mean, you already ruined Du Plessis' moment and now he has to turn around and fight on 2 months' notice against Israel Adesanya. That's just so unfair in terms of an advantage for Adesanya. I talked about it with Aljamain Sterling and Sean O'Malley, same situation there, because it puts him at a significant disadvantage. And he's already taken on a tough challenge. He's already fighting for the belt. And he took a little bit of damage against Robert Whittaker. Not a whole lot, but you never know. He could have been banged up going into that fight. Maybe he tweaked something. Maybe he hurt his hand a little bit. Maybe he twisted his ankle in the fight. Maybe he broke a knuckle. Who knows? I don't know. And the fact that now all of a sudden he's got to turn around on basically 60 days, 2 months notice, and fight Israel Adesanya in the biggest fight of his life for the UFC middleweight title, it's going to be very difficult. And I just hate that that is happening. I wish he had a little bit more time. I wish this storyline wasn't there. And as far as an early prediction for this fight, because I have to give you an early prediction, we're going to have to watch this build up. It's going to be a horrible build up. There's going to be some weird things said, and there's going to be weird fan bases and groups of people kind of aligning themselves in certain situations and trying to, read between the lines. And this guy said this, and this guy said that, and this guy really meant this. And I think, Adesanya is trying to kind of bait Du Plessis into saying certain things and trying to, get his fan base riled up, get Adesanya's fan base riled up. It's all just a motive to put money in their pocket. But as far as an early prediction, I said it when Du Plessis defeated Robert Whittaker. When he stopped Robert Whittaker, all bets are off against the Israel Adesanya fight. Du Plessis is a legitimate title contender. He's a legitimate threat to the middleweight title against Israel Adesanya. He may very well be able to pull it off. He's got grappling. He's got power. He's a big middleweight. The stamina issue, I think, was a bit overblown to begin with, but now you got the two-nostril mythical fighter in Dricus Du Plessis, so his stamina is supposedly better than ever. And also, this is a guy that never quits. He has unbelievable heart, unbelievable durability, and no matter what's happening in the fight, Du Plessis will continue to move forward, continue to throw combinations. He will take one to land one. And that's what makes this fight so interesting because guess what? Israel Adesanya is a phenomenal counter striker. I'm curious how this is going to play out. And also Du Plessis got really good jiu-jitsu. He went for submissions multiple times against Robert Whittaker in their fight. Darce choke, and he locked up a guillotine when Whittaker took him down. So it's going to be very interesting because Du Plessis, it's not like he's just a striker. He has some grappling he can mix in there as well. And if he can get Adesanya down, can he control him? I think Du Plessis has some of the better jiu-jitsu of anyone that Israel Adesanya has faced. And if Du Plessis ragdolling Robert Whittaker like that, then all bets are off in the Israel Adesanya fight. But as far as an early prediction, I have to go Israel Adesanya. I just think the footwork, the head movement, and the counter-striking of Israel Adesanya, combined with the fact that he's shown very good grappling defense and very good fight IQ, I think he gets it done against Dricus Du Plessis. I think he probably KOs or TKOs him. I just think Du Plessis, he squares up his stance and he starts rushing in, throwing combinations. I just have a hard time believing that Adesanya doesn't KO him. And maybe Adesanya is going to be so worried about losing to him. Maybe Adesanya is just going to play it safe and kind of pump the jab and leg kick and move a lot. But, even though Du Plessis gets it done against Robert Whittaker, I just can't imagine him getting it done against Israel Adesanya. But I'll tell you this, Du Plessis really proved himself at UFC 290, and I cannot wait for this fight. Even though I'm going to dread the cringy, corny, all the racial stuff and the lead up and the ethnicity and the breathe in African air, I'm going to hate the build up. Guess what? It's only 8 weeks long. I'm going to hate the build up, only 8 weeks long. So I'm very happy about that we don't have to hear the build up for that long. But I have to go Israel Adesanya. Let me know what you guys think about this whole situation, the whole African thing. Let me know what your early prediction for Adesanya versus Du Plessis is down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.